Hello, this is Graham Fitch coming to you from Steinway Hall in London for Pianist Magazine. In this particular episode I'm going to be talking about signs and symbols, those blobs on the page that we read and hope that we decipher in accordance with the composer's intentions, but sometimes we're not quite sure whether we've done that or what this particular sign means, because it seems to mean something different in this piece and with that composer, and it is a little bit of a minefield. So maybe I'll just start off with a philosophical question here. Are these markings carved in stone in the same way that the notes may be? Or are they suggestions by the composer that maybe on another day he may have given another suggestion? We know that Chopin did that in his teaching. He'd write things on the score differently for this person from the other person. So notation cannot tell us everything. And funnily enough, the two composers whose markings are incredibly explicit, Bartók being one of them, Debussy being another, openly admitted that the printed page was really just an approximation, but the best they could do to notate their intentions. So let's look at the wavy sign, the ornament sign that doesn't have a name. It's actually got loads of names. You know, the wavy sign there, which in the Baroque period, in the French and German Baroque period, was called a trill, and it started on the note above the note. I'll show you in a moment. I just want to go through all the terms. It may also have meant a schneller, which was a three-note ornament depending on the context. Later, it came to be called an upper mordant after 1750. And I think that's where the confusion lies, because we have to read it differently depending on which composers we're looking at. So if I give you an example of that from the partita in E minor, the sixth partita of Bach, this is the opening of the fugue in the toccata, the first movement. And it starts off with an ornament that a lot of pianists of bygone years would get wrong. In other words, they wouldn't play it correctly, not to put too fine a point on it. So notice I'm starting on the note above. Now you'll hear it when I play the next entry, because I'm going to play it slower so you can hear how it pans out against the semiquavers. Those are 16th notes in the counter subject. Let me play you the counter subject. That's the music that the original voice carries on with when the next voice comes in. So let me slow that down for you so you can hear how I'm doing it. And there are a couple of possibilities. Next voice. Do you notice that I finished the ornament on the second semiquaver of the group? And when that's faster, that's the authentic, if you will, way of doing it. That's the way harpsichord players would do it. Now, on the piano, those ornaments can be a little bit fiddly. So there is an alternative, which I don't think is quite as good, which is to do it this way. Let me show it to you slowly again. Do you see how I'm dividing the four notes equally? Now, it's not really quite as good because it sounds a little bit strict and stilted, and we want the ornament to sound snappier, but it is a possibility. Now, moving to Haydn, we see the same shaped ornament this is the sonata in D, Hoboken XV 137, this bright piece in D major, Allegro con brio. And you'll notice if I slow that ornament down, the so-called upper mordant now, starting on the main note. It consists of three notes. Now, I did do a little bit of research into how forte pianists might play this. One or two of them did it that way, but there were a couple others who did it this way, starting the ornament on the upper note. So it's a little bit still in flux, if you will, at this point in the history of music performance. But when we get to Beethoven and the Pathetique Sonata, we find it in the second theme, first movement, second theme. So if I break that down for you, on the main note again. Now some people play it as triplets. It's easier to do it that way actually. Other people play it as 2/16 and an eighth. In other words, 2 semiquavers and a quaver. That's harder to do because it's shorter and it's snappier. So either way would work well for that. Now the next sign and symbol, if you will, is the hairpin, the open crescendo, diminuendo, closed hairpin, and sometimes we find the two of them together. Now this has been in the news recently with a wonderful video from Ben Lordy and Seymour Bernstein, who got together and discussed this. And I would highly recommend you check it out. It used to me, we all were brought up to believe that that meant get louder when the hairpin opened and get softer when the hairpin closed. And indeed, this is what Hummel and Czerny and various others described it as. But by the end of the 19th century, there were other theorists, or musicologists, if you will, who claimed and proved in some way that it could have to do with rubato as well. So we've got now more options. It actually, the hairpin thing can mean many different things. It can mean get louder, or it can mean broaden out, or it can mean push forwards. I'm going to give you a couple of answers, a couple of examples rather, but there's no single answer to this. So there's no recipe. Just, by the way, do not do it in French music. Do not do it in Debussy and Ravel. It didn't mean that. So I've often wondered, in Schumann, we've got here the melody from the album for the young. Let me play you the beginning of it. Now on this next note, Schumann has written on a single note, a hairpin that opens and then closes again on a single note. How can you possibly do that on the piano with tone? The only way you can do it is with time. So it means linger. And here it is again in the next bar. And in the next bar. See, I'm realizing that as a rubato. I'm loitering on the notes that have the hairpin. And it could be that the first one I don't stay quite so long. A bit longer. The longest. Do you see how that works? It suddenly makes sense if you see it as a rubato indication rather than the impossible in that instance. Moving to Brahms, Opus 119, number 1, the beautiful B minor intermezzo. Now we have a letter that Brahms wrote to Clara Schumann, if you're interested, in May 1893. And this is what he says about this piece. He says, this little piece is exceptionally melancholic, and to be played very slowly is not an understatement. Every bar and every note must sound like a retard, as though one wanted to suck melancholy out of each and every one, lustily and with pleasure out of these very dissonances. So if I read the hairpin sign as a diminuendo, we just get this. Which is the way a lot of people play it, because we were all brought up to read that as a diminuendo. But if you follow Brahms's instructions to the letter, literally to the letter he wrote to Clara, and take into account the possibility that that might mean a rubato, then perhaps we get something like this. Now that may seem unfeasibly slow, but I did find a recording by Rudolf Serkin, who would have come from, I'm not saying he's as old as Brahms, but he would have come directly from that generation, and he played it as slowly as that, and it was magnificent. In the new Urtext edition by Jan Ekier, which the Polish edition, they've discovered that the accent signs that we used to think were just accents may be short diminuendo signs. So they've restored this in the edition. I've got the F sharp major nocturne in front of me, opus 15, number 2, which in my old edition has an accent on that first A sharp. Which doesn't feel right to me. Why would I want to accent that? But if I read it as the possibility that I could spend a little longer on that, it makes sense to me. Here, all of them have the same. And this note here, I colored it in. But in my old edition, it would have just said accent, and I would have believed that I had to do something like this, which to me doesn't sound very musical, but if I can give it a different color, then I'm happy. So we've got more meanings to these signs and symbols than we thought. One thing that is just important to know, Schubert, when he writes diminuendo, he means get softer and get slower. When he writes decrescendo, he means get softer without getting slower. And he uses both signs. When I say in the same work, I'm not talking about at the same time. So he may write diminuendo one place and then decrescendo a few measures later, which tells you in this instance, slow down. G flat impromptu, there's a lovely diminuendo, which naturally, it happens naturally. Here's the sign. Right? I bring it to a gentle close, the end of the first section. So in the next section, we find two places where Schubert has marked decrescendo, where a lot of players take the time. Because it could be, if I play it for you, you'll hear. Let me do it incorrectly first. See, there I made a diminuendo. Now let me make a decrescendo. Can you hear? I just went straight through. I got softer without getting slower. So that's an important thing to know. If you don't know it, you could be missing a trick because other composers don't use it in that way. So it's something you've got to know. What does espressivo mean? Well, it obviously means expressively, but what does that, how do we do that at the piano? Does it mean the same thing when Beethoven writes it from when Brahms writes it? Possibly, we don't really know, but we do know that in late Beethoven, when he uses the word espressivo, he means us to take time. How do we know this? Because it's followed a few bars later by a tempo. So that proves that for Beethoven, espressivo meant a relaxation of the tempo. Let me see if I can play this, opus 109, second movement. I'll pick it up from, it looks like bar 112. Our tempo. I probably exaggerated that a little bit, but it's very clear in Beethoven's score there that he wants that to be slower. What about with Brahms? Well, I've got the intermezzo, opus 116 in front of me, the last one. There's a hairpin there in the alto, well, it's actually in the between the staves, but because the leading voice is the alto, it applies to these quavers. Now the soprano doesn't have it. Did you notice that I played these quavers with a little bit more bend? But the answer, just a little bit smoother, a little bit less involved, if you will. But later on, he actually marks in, let me go on a little bit, he marks in, first of all, sostenuto, which for Brahms is telling us to slow down a bit, you know. Here, there's a hairpin there, which may also mean the same thing. Now, Espressivo, I'm going to change my color, I'm going to change the lighting a little bit. I made a little bit more of that top there. I gave a dolce kind of quality to my sound. Sostenuto, piano, another hairpin. See how all those markings affect the tempo. Maybe Espressivo affects the color of the sound as well. It's not possible to be 100% certain about this. Do catch me in the next installment, because I'm going to be carrying on with more signs and symbols. So thank you so much for watching. I hope that was interesting to you. We'll see you soon.